Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everybody to the event 2030 Agenda from Global Emergencies to Solution at the regional level, at the margins of the 2020 High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. It's a pleasure for me to moderate this event that virtually connects us all around the world. And remember, you can take part in this event because you have a chat at your disposal. So send us your opinions, your comments, your questions. All of them are welcome. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our health, economies, and environment. The time for action to implement the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals is now taking off in an entirely different context that we expected. Regional authorities are in the forefront of the fight against the pandemic, and their role will be critical to a sustainable recovery. With all of you, Regions4 President Elena Moreno. Good morning, Ms. Moreno.
A ver, buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon. Okay, everything is activated by now. Hi everyone, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning. Here we are. Here we are in all the continents, each of us at its time. It's a great pleasure and honor for me as recently appointed president of the Region 4 to welcome you to this event. And I think that more than ever, this is a totally necessary event. It's totally necessary to talk about the Agenda 2030 and how to go from these global emergencies to the solutions at the regional level. I think that all of you know us, but for those of you who do not know us, this community of Regions 4 is made up by 40 regional communities and governments, and we represent more than 200 million people. Our network is going to be and is the global voice of the regional government, the states, provinces, regions, and also we negotiate in the United Nations and also at the European Union the different initiatives. So our work is really the result of our commitment with international cooperation, solidarity among regional governments, multi-level governance, and the territorial steering in order to face the present global crisis, including the one we are living of the COVID-19. We are now at a reflection moment about the things we have learned with the pandemic, but also at a very important moment of what we are expecting that the sustainable exit out of this crisis will be. And it is quite clear that after setting or scenery of this exit shouldn't mean to come back to past procedures made by administrations. Really, this pandemic should be used as a fundamental level and a springboard. We are at a decade of action for the definite deployment of the objectives of the sustainable development, and we believe that this should be the guide of a transformative recovery that will reduce the risk of crisis in the future. As part of this commitment in June in Regions 4, we have been working and we have launched a declaration of the subnational governments in favor of a sustainable and resilient recovery and betting on this 2030 agenda as the roadmap that is going to be the answer to this climate and biodiversity crisis, and also in a resilient way so that nobody is going to be left behind. We are going to debate today with the international community and the regional governments about how we have really to speed up to fulfill these objectives of sustainable development and how to combat this loss of biodiversity. The sustainability of our planet depends on that. So thank you very much for being with us. And I'm going to give the floor again to our moderator, Silvia Inchaurrondo.
Thank you, President, with your opinions also in the panel discussion within a few minutes. La pandemia del COVID-19.
The pandemic of this COVID-19 is in its origin a health sanitary crisis that has become one of the worst social and economic crises in decades. And there are voices that really say that within this context, the implementation of these sustainable objectives is not going to be the most urgent thing, but the United Nations say that even more than urgent is, as President Moreno has told us, those are the engine of a very cross-cutting, powerful change that can rebuild our society from the basis of equality, justice, and sustainability too.
Welcome to the Chief of Outreach and Partnership Branch at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Division for Sustainable Development, Lotta Tahtinen. Good morning, Ms. Tahtinen.
Good morning. Dear colleagues, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this event organized by Regions 4 in connection with the high-level political forum on sustainable development. As we all know, this year's HLPF is taking place at an extraordinary time against the backdrop of the ongoing global COVID-19 pandemic, which has uprooted the lives of billions of people. Many have lost their loved ones, and many more continue to suffer from the disease and its effects. The assessments on the impact of COVID-19 on the SDGs are alarming. Recent reports prepared by my department, UNDESA, show that if responses to combating the virus are ad hoc, underfunded, and without a view to long-term goals, decades of progress are at jeopardy of being reversed. As governments are stemming the impacts of the virus on their populations and begin to move towards recovery, we need coherent and comprehensive actions at all levels of governance, at national, regional, and local levels. Three strategic priorities are particularly important during the response and recovery. Namely, first, we need to maintain past progress made towards eradicating basic deprivations. Backsliding on the progress that has already been made on the SDGs not only imperils prospects for eradicating basic deprivations in the future, it also greatly reduces resilience to other shocks in the future, especially for the most vulnerable. Secondly, we need to accelerate the universal provision of quality essential services to all. Guaranteed universal access to services, including healthcare, education, basic income, security, water, sanitation, clean energy, and the internet must become an integral part of the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. And lastly, we need to reverse the course on the degradation of nature. Unlike the sudden onset of the pandemic, the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss have built up more slowly. The pandemic itself reveals the size of the challenge, but also gives us a chance to observe, even for a short period of time, the plausibility of being able to reverse the degradation of nature. Dear colleagues, we are at a watershed moment. As societies around the world begin to recover from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to make sure that our actions place the world on a robust trajectory towards achieving sustainable development in line with the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement on climate change. It is estimated that countries will be investing in excess of $20 trillion for COVID-19 relief. It is essential that governments leverage recovery packages to support green jobs and encourage investments in sustainable sectors. 5 years after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, it's clear that local and regional governments and authorities have a key role in implementing the goals and in ensuring that no one is left behind in their regions, cities, and towns. However, even today, the SDGs can sometimes be seen by different parts of the government as an externally imposed burden that is detached from national and regional and local policies. At the same time, the COVID-19 pandemic is tightening the budget and belts of governments around the world in unprecedented ways. However, now is not the time for us to forsake the 2030 Agenda, quite the contrary. This is the time for us to engage in a strengthened dialogue between different levels of government and all stakeholders on how the SDGs can provide a way for all of us to build back better. My final message is about the need for all of us to increase our ambition and to commit to concrete actions that can accelerate the implementation of the SDGs. I want to take this opportunity to invite all of you to register and showcase your SDG acceleration actions using the global platform that has been set up by DESA, which is available on our website, sdgs.un.org. So far, we have more than 170 SDG acceleration actions that have been registered by governments and stakeholders around the world. By accelerating action on SDG implementation, we can avert the worst outcomes of the pandemic and ensure a fair, more sustainable world for everyone. I wish you all a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for your words, Ms. Tatinen. Sí, es cierto, los gobiernos regionales.
It's really true. The regional governments must play really an essential key role in this context we are living. And the thing is, we are applying ways of working based on networks. We are sharing connection spaces, intersectorial and cross-cutting, and moreover, it is informed and promoted and fostered the active participation in the public management. In the present world, the individual actions and unilateral actions are not able to face the complex challenges of development. And the Program of United Nations for the Development is really having the aim of fostering this governance systems
Development Project Art Initiative, Johannes Kelsnitzer.
Let me start thanking Regions for Sustainable Development for this opportunity to say a few words, and of course extend a very warm greeting to all the distinguished participants of this event to the high-level political forum. I would maybe like to mention the UNDP report from the Human Development Report Office that shows that for the first time in 30 years, we're going to have a significant drop, average global drop of the Human Development Index. So we're really, for the first time in 30 years, global speaking, gonna have a drop in development. That of course goes hand in hand with new areas of poverty, people that are falling back into poverty, inequalities that are accelerated. What are the answers? As UNDP, we're seeing as the leaders in socioeconomic recovery of the post-COVID, the multilateral system, that many of the answers that are given by the countries have to do with the territorial level. This is where jobs are lost. This is where people are really affected by the crisis, and local and regional governments do really provide services, engage with the population, bring the population on board. These are issues that have come out of a study also that we did with the region of Catalonia that was looking into the role of regional governments in implementing the SDGs. Two findings. First, it is about effectiveness, and second, it's about legitimacy. And the legitimacy of the policy that the government puts in place is extremely important in responding to a crisis like COVID-19. Regional governments can reach out, bring people on board, and if people feel on board, the measures that are there, which we feel day to day, will also be implemented and will show their effect. Legitimacy of the policies lead in the end also to much better social cohesion and against these kind of like violent eruptions that we see as many results of the COVID crisis. The second is effectiveness, effective regional, subnational policies, for example, for socioeconomic recovery, for different economic answers stemming from a territory are extremely important. And again, regional governments play a crucial role. Part of a functioning multi-level governance system, regional government can really make a difference and play a very important role in the recovery as well as in the implementations of the SDGs in the local level. I thank you again for this opportunity, and I wish you a very dynamic and interesting exchange between all the participants and the audience. Goodbye.
Y mientras tanto,
Meanwhile, we are going to activate the cameras, we are going to activate the microphones, we are going to start with the debate. We still have got the president of Regions4, Elena Moreno. And hi, good afternoon. Yeah, now we have to look at each other, and we are going also to welcome Eduardo Trani, Subsecretary of Environment of Sao Paulo. Good morning, Mr. Trani. Good afternoon to you all, and thank you so much for the invitation. I want to thank you for this event, for this meeting that I consider to be very important, this event of Regions4. And now, yes, we have to go on with the presentations and the introductions of the panelists. And now we have got Atima Saidi, who's the member of Territorial Management, Development, and Environment. And she's Vice President of Regions4 for Africa. Welcome, Mrs. Heidi. We still have to activate the camera, to activate the microphone. So while Mrs. Heidi is joining us, we keep on introducing our panelists. We have got Alphonse Roblon, Minister of Development of the Alan Islands.
Roblon.
Hello. You all.
Sergio Graf Moreno is
the Secretary of Environment and Territorial Development of Jalisco and Vice President of Regions4 for America. Good morning, Mr. Vice President. Good morning, and it's a pleasure for me to greet all of you. Thank you so much for this invitation. Be very welcome. So, Itziar Gomez is the Rural Minister of Environment and Agriculture in Navarra. Good afternoon, Mrs. Gomez. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having organized this panel that is going to allow us to share local and regional government experience. And I think that this is a shared interest we share all over the world. So thank you so much. And also Pere Aragonés is with us. He's the Vice President and Economy and Finance Minister of the Catalonian General Government. So good afternoon, Mr. Aragonés.
So much for inviting us to be part of this panel. We think it will be a very interesting discussion because all of governments, all the authorities that we are participating, we face the same challenges. So, and the challenges that every time are having more and more complexity. As you can see in Catalonia now, the mask is mandatory everywhere. So this is one challenge we have to reach in the next weeks to fight the pandemic. So thank you so much for inviting us.
Before starting with the debate, we would like also to excuse the absence of people who will not be able to be here. We have got Jakub Peris, Javier Sarraonandia, who is the Vice Minister of Industry of the Basque Country, and Javier Catañero, also from the region of Lombardy, also Minister of Environment. And then, before we start, the question is, how is affecting this COVID-19 to each of you in each of your regions? So, Mrs. Moreno, can you start? Okay, this is something international, and all of us are suffering, of course, first of all, the topic of the health. But I would focus on the fact that in the Basque Country, really for us, the 25 of the gross domestic product comes from industry, and where we are suffering the consequences from the economic point of view, the most important one is in industrial field. And moreover, taking even more into account that the big mass of companies that we have got in the Basque Country are really small and medium-sized companies. So therefore, the impact is much bigger because we are talking about SMEs with a very limited number of workers. And I cannot contribute with data, but really our most important concerns is the recovery of industry, the recovery of the economy. And apart from the fact that I'm going to give also 2 comments and we can discuss it. So really, this pandemic has really laid on the table the model of healthcare, the healthcare model we have got, because what they have really shown is that in a demographical pyramid, the one we have got in the Basque Country with a very aging population, where the healthcare system was migrating to a chronic people, people with chronic illnesses model. Now we have got the need of a healthcare system of acute cases, something we had been forgetting. So within this healthcare model, in this social healthcare model, and really the impact on what it could be the welfare model, with the reflections could be the reflections we can make are very important. Mrs. Moreno, you have told us that the pandemic is striking really industry in a very hard way. Which are the support measurements you have started with for the industry? We have mobilized. Well, I think that in the output of this crisis and in the exit of this economic crisis, it's going to be very important the role of each of us. We have a very important debate. We are at the moment we are going to have elections in a couple of days, but the public sector is going to be very important, and the capacity to getting in debt so that we do not have any economic cutoff. And there we have got a critical point in order to see which is the situation we are going to be in. And in this situation of the public sector, we will be able about how we can push industry, how we accompany industry in this recovery. But I would also explain here that this pandemic that has taken place overnight, that hasn't allowed any previous preparation, that hasn't allowed to adopt certain measures and has been very global, but it has had the biggest impact on the people who were underprivileged, in people with a more precarious job, and people with salaries that were in the black economy, and also in the freelance people, in the self-employed people. So we'll have to adopt measures not only addressed to one sector, such as the industrial one, because it's very important for us, but also all the part regarding the freelance people, the healthcare employment, the social employment. So we will have to adopt many measures in the whole productive area. I'm going to ask you whether we can revitalize industry thinking in a green way. But please let me go to Catalonia first, because Catalonia is really attending a new outbreak that has bound them to confine one of the regions, Segria region. So, Mr. Aragonés, the healthcare system is really a reason of concern, and I don't know whether in this context, the objectives of the sustainable development are also a reason of concern, or they have been left behind. No, they aren't left behind at all. We are trying to do two things at the same time. On the one hand, to manage what is the recovery of this social space, the economic recovery, and then also to manage the small outbreaks that have been very concentrated, very focused on certain regions, such as the Segria region, where we have to devote all the necessary resources in order to combat it, to face it. Obviously, we from the government of Catalonia, from the government of the Generalitat, this is the name of the Catalonian government, really the solution is exactly in this Agenda 2030 and the sustainable objectives. We did it also in this elaboration of this Agenda Plan 2030 that had been approved last year in September, and also with our approval of the budgets of the Catalonian government that are really ruled by those axes of the objectives of the sustainable development, and therefore the plan of recovery of economic reactivation that we are going to approve at the end of the month. Really, this is in the same line of the objectives of sustainable development. So we do not have to leave them behind. They have to be put at the very center of this discussion, because really the origins of a big part of the consequences what we are seeing from the economic and social and environmental point of view of this COVID-19, and also the solutions, the explanation is really in the content of these sustainable development objectives. It's not the moment of leave them behind, but to put them at the very center of the discussion. Mr. Aragonés, and in these times of pandemic, where so many resources are necessary in order to face especially the healthcare emergency, who are safeguarding for the fulfillment of these sustainable development objectives, because the government is really positive that no 1 cent should be deprived from it. From the very government of Catalonia, because the commitment of the authorities in Catalonia is really very clear. Then the civil society in Catalonia is very well organized. We have got very powerful organizations in the civil society. They are really very much involved. And that was the national agreement in Catalonia, the big agreement for the objectives of sustainable development, and therefore they are really engaged. So this safeguard of the citizens is really very important, because in the end the political decisions are really being subjected to the approval of the citizens. If from the point of view of the organization of the civil society and from the mass media, they are really paying very much attention to these objectives, and this is something very relevant for them not to be left behind. And all those policies that we had worthy, they must be very specific policies. And of course, we have to see that this safeguard of the citizens, or this watching out of the citizens, is very important, and we need funds. As the Minister of Navarre has said, it's not the moment of saying that the public sector can have a discrete positions, but they must play a key role, the main role. So the structures that are over the state, for instance, these European funds that are being discussed today, there was a proposal of the President of the European Council regarding this reactivation fund of 750 million euros. We understand it's very clear for us, and we also reivindicate that these reactivation funds, at least in the case of Catalonia, and this can't be extended to many other territories, must be managed from the subsidiarity and also from the territory. So therefore, at the sub-state level, and in this sense, Catalonia is really claiming to be able to decide about the destination of these reactivation funds, because it's only us, the ones who know the economy of our territory and our society. So that's why we could really build this reactivation plan. Thank you, Mr. Aragonés. The budget, something very important underlined by Mr. Aragonés. And I see that now we have got Atimar Sahidi. She's a member of this territorial management and development and environment from Rabat, Saleh and Kenitra. Mahaban. So be very welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello and welcome.
Yes, yeah, oui, bien sûr.
Señora Moreno, no se me ha olvidado.
Mrs. Moreno, I haven't forgotten it. So how we can revitalize industry thinking in a green way? Okay, first of all, we have to think in a green way. But I would like also to introduce a nuance when we are talking about the topic of how we live this pandemic, and we are talking about the European Green Agreement. We are positive that this Green Deal is really the most important roadmap, which is very valid for the situation we are living. But I would also like to highlight that it's not an environmental one, but an economic one, with a vision and a mission from Europe, integrating, and I think this is something essential, the ecology and the economy, and it is defining some future questions that are going to transform society and are going to transform the economy, and are going to generate a new orientation, especially in topics that are as important as energy, as important as rehabilitation of our cities, as the new construction, and in topics that are as important as food. They are defining 7 very important axes in the economic way and also for the future. And I think that this roadmap that I do share with Mr. Aragonés, that the good ideas, if are not accompanied by good money, they are just ideas. And these European funds are funds that have to follow this orientation. From that moment onwards, we will be able to discuss how much, from where, but this European roadmap have got really some very accurate guidelines, and thanks to these guidelines, we will be able to leave this pandemic with an environmental, economic, and social transformation. And I think that the 3 axes must go hand in hand, and we cannot make any development disregarding people who are going to suffer from it. We have got this agenda 2030, we have got this European Green Deal, and we have to implement those funds with these roadmaps. And this is the way we are going to use to leave the pandemic. I would like to talk with Mrs. Saidi, because before she joined us, we have been talking how the pandemic has been affected to each country. In the case of Morocco, your frontiers are closed. There is not a date to reopening them. You have cancelled the operation of this crossing the strait. And in the middle, we have got the economic crisis. And within this context, we have been wondering, have priorities been changed, and have these objectives of development, of sustainable development been left behind? Aren't they urgent anymore for the governments?
Firstly, I'm so happy, and I express my joy to be here with you and to participate with you. So sorry, then I have another meeting, and I had to leave. I must join it, fortunately. But I took care to approach you the situation of Rabat and to share with you the general situation in Morocco from COVID-19. So, like wall and world, like you say, Rabat, like all regions of Morocco, took rapid and severe measures under the order of King Mohammed VI. Starting with the rapid closure of the border, limiting the movement
Parece que hay algún problema con el vídeo de la señora
Apparently,
Saidi.
there are some problems with the video of Mr. Sahidi. It has been frozen. Okay, we are going to try to recover the signal coming from Morocco in order to talk to her. But now I would like to talk with Mr. Roblon, because we are thinking of integrating these sustainable development objectives to the economic plans. How can we do this? How can we guarantee that not a single cent of this money devoted to this can be kept? Can we preserve what we have achieved until now? And this is what Mrs. Tatin has said before. She has said, let's be careful, because perhaps we cannot preserve anymore what we had achieved already.
Yes, that's a very important and crucial question. The government of Åland is linking the SDGs to our regional budget process, and this will be very important when implementing the recovery budget. So we are heading for a tough process in September when we're starting the discussions. But we as a government is very committed, of course, to continue working for a sustainable society. It's the only way. We can't turn back or go backwards. We have to go forwards. And I hope and think that the citizens in our societies knows this. We have reached a very the knowledge and the understanding of how crucial these questions are, I think, is very broad. So hopefully, and hopefully we will be able to connect these two processes.
Señor Olón, hablaba el...
Mr. Olón, Mr. Krasnitsa has been talking about working in a network. How are you working in networks? Which are the networks that have been created? Which are the networks that have been reinforced? Is it a good way to work in a multi-level, trying to advance, depending on the competencies of each regional or subnational government, in order to reach these sustainable development objectives?
In Åland, we don't. The government doesn't own the process. The process is kept alive by a sustainability council that is has different members from different sectors of society, both from business and NGOs and very different parts of the society. And this is an important thing, that it's a bottom-up, inside-out process. So everybody is included in this way of thinking and moving forward. And in June, this council, which has also, I might add, also has been tightly linked to the government's process of handling the crisis, and that has been very good, because then we have got input from all different parts of society, and also been able to discuss these things when handling the crisis. So that has been very, very good. And in June, we presented the digital roadmaps, how to achieve our goals set out in our sustainability and development agenda. And these roadmaps is open now on the internet, and we hope to see a lot of activity from our citizens and organizations and companies. So it's very, very important to include as much as possible, so that these processes don't must see a sustainable recovery.
Mm-hmm. Veo que la señora Zaidi.
I see that Mrs. Zaidi is again in our debate. Mrs. Zaidi, we have been talking whether there should be a change of priorities and whether these objectives of sustainable development have been left behind because of this pandemic healthcare crisis. And you have been telling us about the experience of Morocco. Please go ahead. Tell us, please.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Exactly, I talk about the decisions and process taken by our government, and important for us. This is how our government is supporting the industry and the business that are fighting the coping with the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Señora Zaidi, ¿cómo está incorporando?
For being brief, I focus that on process and action. Firstly, the national government and also regions have set up economic watch committees which analyze the situation and follow national and regional economic news. It's set up grant and facilitation to help business. The maintenance of agri-food industries which ensure supply by installing the safety measure recommendation by the WHO and doing the COVID test clearly and recurrently for making the industry in the correct situation.
Señora Zaidi, quiero agradecer.
The transformation, this is for, in my opinion, this is a smart action. The transformation of textile factories for the production of masks and the installation of more than 30 factories for this at national level, some of which are in Rabat. Pardon? That way, we become the second producer for masks worldwide by the national government.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And we encourage of industry based on sustainable development and introduction of the tax for carbon production. And we are ready for the use of renewable energies for our industrial plan.
Señora Faidi, quiero agradecerle.
Mrs. Faidi, I really want to thank you for your participation. Unfortunately, Mrs. Faidi cannot stay for longer to the debate.
And I hope we will have another opportunity to debate longer.
Ojalá, señora Faidi.
We wish it's like this.
Merci.
Thank you so much. So now we are talking about, Mr. Graf, about the sustainable development objectives as elements we want to match into budgets, in our lives, in our policies. But the question is, if these were part of the solution, as Mr. Aragonés and Mrs. Moreno have been underlined, so we don't have to match anything. The solution is based on them. Yes. Of course. For instance, in Jalisco, the state development plan is establishing quite clearly the sustainable development objectives. So each action that is going to be addressed to the recovery will have to take this into account, but it's not easy because to put it on paper and to establish these lines of actions is more or less simple, but really to identify the public policy instruments and financial instruments are really very big challenges. The impact of a pandemic like this one, which is directly affecting economy and the people who are underprivileged, really puts the governments, the national governments in countries such as Mexico with subsidiaries systems, and most of the tax resources are captured by the federations and are transferred to the states. We have got a very big difficulty if there are not multi-level instruments that can allow us to reactivate everything, and this really leaves the states in a very difficult position. We have started a very premature isolations because the healthcare system at the national level is really very limited, and we had to enlarge our hospitals capacity, and we had to isolate the cities in a very quick way because the second city of the country has got 5 million people, and we had to close it in a very early stage, and this makes us be in one of the last places of the infection of the country. We are one of the most inhabited states, but right now we are really growing with the pandemic, and it's impossible to keep closing the economy. And with this lack of instruments, as Elena has mentioned before, at the European level that can allow us to lead these subnational governments to a recovery that can be more ordered, we have to use the own resources through credits. But what we have been trying to do is that these resources of credits for the economic reactivations are also anchored with elements of sustainability for the reactivation of industry, and also especially in order to reverse the food impact in the poorest communities. And if we don't do it from the perspective of these sustainable development objectives, we won't be able to fully recover ourselves in the future. Mr. Graf, I want to ask you whether the population is concerned, because Mr. Aragonés has told us that the Catalonian population is already concerned. And what is the situation in Jalisco? Regarding the goals of the Sustainable Development Objectives and the way of understanding them, there is still a very important work to be done. However, at the level of the instruments of public policies, we have got a rooted governance system, and we have got a multi-level one where we have been working with associations of municipalities. So we have got schemes such as in Spain, man communities, and Jalisco is the only state in Mexico that has developed this. And we have gotten man communities that are association of municipalities in order to develop the local capacity. And we have to establish environmental policies of articulating the production, especially in the rural areas, that can lead us to a activation that is not speeding up the processes of deforestation. So this allows us to work at the level of state government and also with the municipal governments too. Okay, we are connected through 25 countries because apparently this conversation we are maintaining, this is the magic of the virtuality, seems to be, well, we are widespread in the whole world and interconnected with participants of 25 countries, and I want to thank them for their presence and for all their comments and opinions and questions they are transmitting to us thanks to the chats. One of them was telling us that today he's been very sad to know the idea or the piece of news that really the so-called Basque whales of the Basque people are disappearing, and because they have come apart from the coast because they felt threatened by everything. Water were warm, they went to cooler waters, and now the ships are throwing the nets and they are trapped by the nets and they have got a very slow death. And one of the participants is telling us that in the middle of this pandemic, Mrs. Gomez, feel like perhaps we are forgetting our fight against the climate change. Hi, good afternoon. No, not at all. I think that is quite the opposite. If something has been proven by the experience we are living at this moment, is that the health of people, both the individual health and also the collective health, the social health, is really very much linked to the health of the planet. So I think that the action against climate change that demanded a continuous commitment and the commitment we had at the normative level, the pandemic has really speeded this commitment up, and it has been proven that two of the big threats that are really threatening mankind are the climate change and the pandemic of the COVID-19, and they are really demanding common objectives. So a brave and shared leadership, as people have said before, as my colleagues have said before, the appearance of this, the outbreak of this coronavirus crisis and the later recovery has to be transformed and has to really face it. This must become an opportunity to channel the future of the planet to a more sustainable and more inclusive way, not rather a path to face the climate change. We have to protect the environment. We have to invest in this loss of biodiversity and guarantee the health of the planet and people, and also the safety, the security in the long run of mankind. As I have said before, until now, until this COVID-19, it was quite clear the norm framework and the political commitment that we adopted in different institutions, in the government, in the parliaments, in town halls, with a very clear view of which the climate emergency was. And now I think that at these moments, what has become evident is that this health of ours, of this social health and this private health, can only be linked to the health of the planet in this green horizon we have been talking about until now. So far from going away from our political commitment, really, we have become even more committed with this emergency. I think it's really the opposite. At least this is the experience and the commitment we have got in the Navarre government. I'm going to ask all of you, I'm going to ask it also to Mr. Trane, who is listening to us from Sao Paulo. Okay, the attendants realize that all of us who are talking here, we are convinced that these sustainable development objectives are not only compatible with this fight against COVID, but can be at the ground of a revitalization of society in the future. But there is a participant who's asking us whether you, that really know the governments, the regions at different levels of authorities, at an international level, whether you are realizing that there are governments governments or politicians that are making the most of going even beyond this negation of the climate change and insisting that it is not the time now to fight for these sustainable development objectives, but it is much better to postpone them, to put them off, because now we have got another emergencies. Which is the emergency? I would like to ask for those people who are going forward in this negationist attitude, which is the emergency then? What is the priority? I think that I cannot imagine what can they say, because we are convinced about those things. This is part of our work, this commitment that is quite clear for us, and it is very clear for us where we are and what we are doing, because we are convinced that this is the only possible way. And I would like that in this panel of guests we would have somebody that would defend another thesis, but I would like to listen which is what they are really saying that the emergency is, that the priority is, and the way to reach this. I'm going to repeat myself. If it was very clear for us that we had a climate emergency for the world, nowadays it is not the emergency of the planet, it is the health of each of us. So they have been speeding this commitment up, and they have speeded the emergency that all of us have had in the very own care of the destiny of people. I would ask those people who are negating this phenomenon, which is really the priority of the emergency they are suggesting or proposing, and which are really the ways and the objectives, because I can see just one, a real one. So just to see that we have posed the question and many panelists wanted to talk, I'm going to give the floor to all of you. Mr. Prani, which is your way of seeing this? Are negationist people growing, or? Good afternoon to you all. I'm very happy to be here with all of you. I see that the debate is a very lively one. Negationism in Brazil. In Brazil, we are talking about 120 million people, a huge country. I represent Sao Paulo region. It's really a country, because we are talking about 42 million people, and the discussion, the debate of negationism regarding the climate change is not a climate change in whole Brazil. Quite the contrary, at a regional scale, such as in Sao Paulo, we are really aligned in order to take care of this climate change and in order to fulfill these sustainable development objectives. But I don't think that it is the most important issue. What is happening in Brazil nowadays is a very big debate about deforestation of the Amazonia and other topics that are really serious regarding the environment. Quite the contrary, the regional states such as Sao Paulo are performing very important policies within this philosophy or perspective. And the topic of climate change, as our colleague has said for a moment, is also affecting the region. We have got 645 municipalities. We have got a very important project of network with these municipalities, and which are the initiatives in favor of the climate change. And we have associated policies. So in Brazil, for us, and in Sao Paulo state at least, we are absolutely in favor of this international agenda, of the commitments of this COP climate, and we are really performing many experiences. There is not a feeling of negating this climate change, especially because the aspects of this natural disaster, the manifestations of these natural disasters are something we can touch in Brazil, and they have got also the effects on the economies. So we are in favor of these sustainable development objectives, and we are very active in favor of the networks with the municipalities. I think we are going in the right way, and there's even a movement of taking care of the climate change in Sao Paulo. There is also a national debate regarding other topics, but as the state is a nation state, we are very poor and we are very worried about this issue. Thank you so much, Mr. Trani. Mrs. Moreno wanted to intervene, so Elena, go ahead. What did you want to say? regarding the topic of these people who are negating these things, really, I don't think that we could ever have a person who's negating this in Region 4, because we would hit him on the bottom and we could put him on the street. But I would like to talk about an issue we are really very concerned about, is that this Agenda 2030, these objectives are difficult to be transmitted to the citizens, are very difficult to be integrated in the policies, because they are interwoven, and the public administrations have got very tight departments, and we have to make even an internal effort to integrate these objectives within the policies and budgets. This is not easy, but also it's difficult to transfer them to the citizens. And in this case, it happens the same with the topic of the climate change. We have to stop talking about the climate change, and we have to talk about healthcare, about clean energy, sustainable transport. So to transfer this to the field of what the citizens can understand. But in this case, there is a factor. We have been talking about the importance of the public sector in order to leave the crisis, in order to fight against the climate change, in order to recover the diversity. But we have to talk about the importance of the social transformations and social agents, so that we can really make a movement that is not always from top to bottom, but bottom to top. And we have been seeing this orientation in Europe from a social point of view. We see what it has happened in Germany, what has happened in the elections in France, where the bet on the green has really to be reinforced with this pandemic. We have stopped and we have listened to the birds, and we have seen animals that we never thought that could run on our streets, and we have looked at the neighbors. And I think this is something very important, and this strength that is in the society is very important to be mobilized. And I keep on saying that we have got a fine roadmap, and we have to be able to move this from down to bottom, and that this direction of the social transformation can go in this line. Otherwise, this is not going to be possible, and we cannot go forward in this sense. There are many participants, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for the whole debate that has been generated in the chat, and because of all these comments that you are sending us. The audience have told us that people enjoy listening to Mr. Aragonés saying that they have got a very consolidated government, because they imagined an attitude that had to do more with Mrs. Moreno. So many people think that these sustainable objectives are a very big pie, a very big part of the pie. And some people say we need budget also for roads and many other things. Okay, I do agree with Elena. It is difficult now to find a growth of these people who negate these things. For instance, in Mexico, we have got a national confederation and commissions of the governors, and we have got one for the objectives of sustainable development, and one commission of governors about natural resources, about water resources and climate change. And then an initiative was born thanks to Jalisco, because Jalisco is the chairman of the Alliance of Governors, where a commitment for decarbonizing the economy was reached. And we have got a very important element regarding conservation of biodiversity. This allows the governments, the state governments, to start having a support of the institutions, those of us who are responsible for this environmental policy. In this way, we have got a very important public and political support in order to insist of this reactivation, in order to have a greener economic growth. And this has derived in positioning of alliances and network of 14 state governments in front of a decision of the federal government of having of of stopping this use of the renewable energies, and the society has reacted in a very strong way in order to stop this process. So the subnational governments are really aware of it, because we live on our own bodies the effects on the population. The municipal government is the one having the first contact with the citizens. So if we do not develop capacities with them, as Elena has said, it's going to be very complicated to transmit these instruments to the society, to the citizens. So I think that we are at a moment which is critical, which is very important, where it is necessary to consolidate with the subnational governments this institutional structure at a multi-level, from the international agreements to the local actions. And quite often they don't find a suitable structuring, and then at the local level too. So Mr. Graf, we do not know how many questions we are receiving in this sense. We are going also to debate this comment of the OCD, but Pera Aragonés has asked for the floor, so go ahead, please, Mr. Aragonés. Here there's an element that is crucial for me, I think, that is to avoid this gap between economic reactivation and facing the policies against the climate change. So the key concept from my point of view is the one of a fair transition. So at the moment where the gross domestic product in Europe is going to fall about 10%, it's going to be the same more or less in Catalonia as in many other countries. So the need of reactivating economy is very big. So the cost of reactivating the economy cannot doing it based on some steps that are going to take us to the past in this fight against the climate change. For instance, policies of change of mobility, advancing to a more sustainable mobility, of keeping on vetting for the public transport, and also for the elimination of the private transport, especially in those vehicles that have got a combustion engine. All these changes imply a cost for the citizens, and it is very important that there can be the necessary funding to find the fair transitions, because otherwise this gap is going to be bigger. So I think that this should be one of the goals, and this is where we are focused too. And exactly in this reactivation plan that has got different axes and that have been presented in July, there is a very important plan that is going to be fed by specific projects. And one of the most important evaluation criteria the government is going to have at the time of being selected is whether they are aligned or not with these objectives of sustainable development. So I really want to insist on this concept of fair transition, because we do not want to choose between economic prosperity and climate one, but also to join the two concepts, and therefore the need of this fair transition with a suitable funding so that every social sector can face it. I'm going to pose a question to Mr. Trani and Mr. Roblom. Think about it, because look at the question they are posing. How can we advance all together in the Agenda 2030 from the regions if the official mandate is really in the government of the states? Do not answer now, because I want to listen to the voice of the OCDE. To what extent the national governments can implement the goals of the development, of the sustainable development? More, less? Can you quantify that? Can we do that? Must we do this? Aziza Ahmouche is the boss of Division of Cities, Urban Policies and Sustainable Development of the OCDE, and this is her opinion.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and let me start by thanking Ms. Elena Moreno and Regions for Sustainable Development for this opportunity to join you virtually and to share with you some of the messages that have come out of the work that we've been doing at the OECD on a territorial approach to the Sustainable Development Goals. And I would like to emphasize two of these messages in particular, which I hope will be relevant to the discussion that will follow in the panel. The first one is that we have seen across the globe more and more regions using the Sustainable Development Goals as a policy-making tool rather than a pure compliance agenda. This idea that national governments committed to the UN and are held accountable is very true and valid in a shared responsibility across their levels of government. But what is even more interesting is how more and more governments at subnational level are using the SDGs as a framework to rethink from the ground up their regional development strategies, the way they allocate budget, the way they prioritize investments, and also the way they plan, in particular in this post-COVID-19 era. We had the pleasure to work with regions such as Flanders in Belgium, Cordoba in Argentina, Paraná in Brazil, who have all adapted their existing plans to the Sustainable Development Goals. But we also had the pleasure to work with regions such as Viken in Norway or southern Denmark, who have formulated new plans and strategies based on the Sustainable Development Goals. The second message that is very important from this work is that we need to push the statistical and measurement frontier and to go granular with SDGs data, to be able to measure the distance of regions and cities vis-à-vis each of the goals where they have core prerogatives. And this means more than 65% of them all. And if we don't do that, and if we continue to rely on national average, we are going to mask huge regional disparities in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we will not be able to develop place-based responses and targeted local actions. We know from the Measuring Cities and Regions Distance tool to the SDGs that we have developed at the OECD that 80% of the regions from OECD countries and partner countries have not achieved the suggested end value for any of the 17 goals. Not a single of these regions has achieved the suggested end value for SDG 13 on climate, for instance, or 5 on gender equality, and only 20% of them have achieved the end value for SDG 10 on reduced inequality, or 12 on responsible consumption. Therefore, we need to advance this data and measurement agenda. We have started doing so at the OECD, and we look forward to working with all of you in the near future to use this data as a tool for better policies and better lives. Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias, señora Ahmous.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Ahmous. Mr. Roblon, are there inequalities at the time of applying these objectives of sustainable development? Are they being quantified? Must we quantify them? And especially, how can we advance from the regions if the mandate of this 2030 agenda is in the hands of the government of the states?
Well, yes, we have to protect our competences in the regions. First of all, I think when we're handling the crisis now with the pandemic, an additional effect has been that our national emergency measures are centralizing power, and it makes us regions being more of a doer than the legislator and policy maker, and that's a very interesting aspect of the crisis management in the pandemic, and also I find it's been a very interesting discussion, because I think this is one of the greatest challenges when it comes to reaching a sustainable society, is that we have to include people, and we have to do the job as close to the ground as possible, and really make people to unite and feel included in the process and know why we are doing it, because otherwise it gets some kind of a academic upper thingy that people doesn't really care about. And so I think that the regions, we also have to really take the responsibility, because sometimes I feel that we are living in we are in a world of what I call somebody elserism. That why should we have to do anything in our small part of the world? We should rely on the states, or we should rely on the EU, or and China must do something before we do anything. So I think that is one of the greatest things that we have to do as regional politicians is that really make it urgent for the people, and so they feel that they feel included in the policy we are creating.
Enseguida le doy también la palabra.
And now I'm going to give the floor to Mrs. Gomez there in Navarra. But now, Mr. Trani. Yes, I'm very happy to be given the floor in this debate. In Brazil, the federation or the federative topic is really very important. We have got the local, the national, and the regional scale. We have got a national committee at the level of federal government, but we must have in mind that these policies have not always been real in the different levels, as I've told you. Sao Paulo is a state nation. It's a very big state, and in the year 2019, we have achieved succeeding in the location of these objectives within the multi-level plans with the macroeconomies. We have integrated the objectives. This has been very important. This has been very important, but I think that it is true that to integrate them in the local and national level has been very important. Now we are talking about raising awareness of the different policies that have been made or implemented at a regional scale have to be compared with what we do in the budgets, because each budget of each secretary has to follow the objectives of the OCDE. So now we are in an experience until the year 2023 where we are going to see, and this is going to lead us to 2030, and we are watching, taking into account the small municipalities, and there are different experiences by now that are already working. Now we are looking for the tools, we are looking for the way of making that these objectives can allow a more integral and integrative politics of the different topics. And as Elena has said, for us, environment, health, education, this is something really very clear. And we are very much involved in it, and we want this integration of the ODS, but there are some other sectors where the situation is not the same, and the objectives are going to help us to make this integration. I'm happy that our governor has decided to integrate them in a pluri-annual plan, voting them in the assembly and making them compulsory. So it is like this. We are going to monitorize them, and we are going to check whether they are really applied or not. And I think that this is a tool that is integrated in Brazil at the regional level and national level. And I think this is a very interesting project, and I hope that we can really carry it out with all the stakeholders. Mr. Crane, of course, many participants are really talking about the reflection of Mr. Roblon about this centralizing trend that has arisen because of the reaction of every government to this crisis. And some participants are wondering whether this re-centralizing tendency, Mr. Gomez, Mr. Graf, is really harming you at the time of working for implementing these objectives. Well, I think that, as it has been said before, one of the real dangers we have seen and we have checked in the crisis of this COVID-19 has been really this re-centralizing process. We have observed it, and one of the most important issues is the one of the regional and local governments. In order to keep on protecting the competencies, we should reinforce them, and we need a work framework, an own framework that really aims not only to have the work framework, but also to share these economic funds with leadership and especially with authority. In Navarre, really, we approved to encourage a plan that could face the crisis of the COVID-19. We approved it on May the 6th in order to reactivate Navarre. So the plan was called in Basque Navarra Suspertu. It's an integral plan that it is not only there to overcome the crisis, but we aim at creating a social and economic model of citizen participation. We are working so that this plan can be a real opportunity with the change we have mentioned to a sustainable model to a green one and of an energetic transition that has been also demanded by the climatic emergency. Really, we want to overcome the crisis provoked by the COVID-19, but really what we want is to create a new economic and social model, a new model that is fostering new prosperity models, a new system of governance, of public governance with new leaders, with new values, with different ways of acting that can also encourage the democratic quality and the citizen participation. We are working on it from each department of the government with an open participation to all the citizens and with the different social and economic agents of Navarre. This is a very important working framework, and this is the one that has to be used in order to reivindicate with leadership and with authority the economic funds that we need in order to perform it, to carry it out. Mr. Graf, go ahead. In Mexico, in the last years, well, Mexico is a federal republic, and unluckily, we have had in the last years a strengthening of the central politics that has generated a situation of incompatibility among some state policies and some federal policies, especially in the last years. And this has become even more acute with this COVID, because facing a very centralized position without acknowledging the specific aspects of each region and without instruments of economic reactivation in an anchor word that would allow the states really to implement local activities, this has really making a very big debate about the taxing distribution in Mexico, and 18 states have already talked about that in a cooperative way with the federal government and a discussion about how to do things, because what is deriving from this is that the economic reactivation, thinking of this approach, of the central approach of the sustainable development objectives, and with this responsibility of the climate change, they need funding, because without funding, without finance, it's very difficult to develop them. And really this is leading the different states to be indebted, and this debt will mean more difficulties for the future, because the debt will be are related to the government warranty they can give for it, and they aren't usually warranty of international funds, which are the ones that cost less, but they are talking about banking finance that have got a more important effect on the public finance, but they are necessary in order to go forward. But we have seen this in the design of how to implement our program Jalisco COVID, how to serve the crisis from a local perspective in accordance with all the social and economic stakeholders in the state, the university, our own table of monitoring, of epidemiologic monitoring, that has led us to make decisions that sometimes have gone in the opposite directions to the ones that have been established before. Mrs. Moreno have mentioned, and Mr. Graf also, this indebting, these credits, the need of financing in order to implement these objectives. And Mrs. Admouche from the OCDE has been also reflecting about it, because everything has been implemented in a very unequal way. In the implementation of these objectives, there are different speeds, aren't there? Yeah, not only in the implementation of these objectives, but now a very important concept has been mentioned here, and it is the concept of social justice. This must be above any other issue, because really there are different realities in the different territories, even within the same state, even within the same region. And when we talk about implementing the objectives, a core issue is that nobody has been left behind. And in order to avoid this, really the funding must be allocated in a very fair way, because of course there are different speeds and there must be this warranty of social justice. And I would also like to make the most of the fact that, and I've been very surprised to listen to Mr. Roblon about the situation in Ireland after the things we have experienced in Spain about this tension that there has been with the centralization of the management of the COVID. And I think that really the autonomy of the regions has been really affected somehow, because it is true that there must be a coordination, because it is unavoidable. There must be a coordination at the state level in certain decisions that are affecting the whole population. And then the frontiers or the borders are not there for the virus. Virus cannot understand about frontiers, because really the virus can go from one place to another, and it is not sensible to make decisions for one diligence and decisions for others. But it is true that also this multi-level governance, that is something very nice, has been put into practice. And we have seen in the COVID how difficult it is really to coordinate in the practice everything, respecting the autonomy of the regions. So we can do it much better. We have to improve this. And simply just to mention one issue, also in Spain, we have experienced at the political level that politicians are not joining in order to combat the COVID. But in Spain, the COVID has been used among the politicians to fight among themselves, and this is something we regret. Okay, forgetting this, the objectives must have in their implementation as a central axis this social justice. We have really to combat poverty, climate change, and we have to do it with this justice and this balance. And for this balance to happen in the territories, everything must be very clear, especially regarding the responsibilities of each region, and especially which the role of the states must be. So it must be really a coordinating task and not really a legislative or intervening task or ruling the local life. And we have still a lot to learn, and this is one of the keys to go forward in this Agenda 2030. Mr. Aragonés, would you like to say something else? Yes, regarding this issue of the role of the recentralization. Each territory here has got its own reality and its own debates within its society. In the case of Catalonia, many of the attendants know the political discussions that we have got, so our answer will be to have a known independent state, and Catalonia should become an independent country where they could participate in a direct way. But this doesn't mend the situation of the necessary multi-level cooperation for the rest of the territories, but rather than recentralization, we should opt clearly for situations that require cooperation and that require for collaboration with a co-decision. We have to opt for co-decisions and to have instruments for co-decisions, leaving apart the debates we can have about the level of independence, federalism, because in each territory the reality is different. But I think that in this sense it is very important that now that we are talking about reactivating the economy, at least in these parts of the world where we have overcome the first wave of the COVID and we are thinking of the reactivation, it's very important that this reactivation can be made from this co-decision. It is something fundamental for us, and obviously this co-decision must be guided in the practical aspects of the specific policies with these objectives. Mr. Trani, you wanted to have the floor. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think it is a very interesting debate on the difference between the countries, among the countries. And I wanted to say something about what is happening at the national and regional scale in Brazil. We are talking about 27 regions, and the phenomenon of the COVID has proven the weakness of the national Brazilian state. There has been a kind of cutoff between the people who have been negating the COVID and the critics the criticism on health at the national level. And this attitude of negating the COVID has been so strong that from the very beginning of this pandemic, it has been accepted by the region. And this is something very new. The 27 governors of the states have organized each their own things, because we weren't given any norms at the national level. Well, we were given measures regarding economy, but we didn't have any measures at a COVID level. And Sao Paulo has played a main role, first of all, because as we are a state region, the governor of Sao Paulo has really worded a whole program and has made a project against this negative attitude, and he has put both health and science at the first level. So we have acquired very important regional experiences, and this has been one of the most important pillars of the national organization. So this makes a difference compared to other countries. And I think that unluckily, both in Brazil and also in Latin America, we are very far from finishing. And you know this because of the communication media. And this has to do with these difficulties of organizing things among the federal regions, local services, and the government. That's why I have asked to talk, because I think this is quite interesting. It has nothing to do with the situation in Spain or in France. We are almost finishing. We are almost reaching the end of this event. And now I'm going to ask all of you and each of you one idea of an important idea that you don't want us to forget. But Mr. Roblon has been the one to talk about this tendency, about this re-centralization or centralization after the crisis of the COVID. And there are many participants that want to listen to your opinion, Mr. Roblon, after all this debate, to your opinion about it.
Well, we are going to put together a commission here to look on what happened during the handling of the crisis, and what worked and what did not work when it comes to our relationship with Finland and with the autonomy. So I'm looking forward to see what that commission finds, and what kind of conclusions we can make. But I really want just to stress that we must continue to include, and that has also been a very interesting part, and a very important thing. That it is a fair transition, so that people don't feel left behind. And I think that we as regions and as the politicians that really knows and work very closely to the people, we have to see our responsibility in that, and to work alongside with our citizens.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roblon. We have already finished, and we have to express one idea, just one idea. We shouldn't forget, within this unexpected context where we have to apply the objectives of sustainable development in between of a very big pandemic, and with the initiative you have been underlining of the fact that the budget and the fight and the combat and the push in order to implement these objectives is not left behind, but can be even the basis of a social transformation for the future, for a more fair society. Mrs. Gomez. Microphone, yes. Thank you so much. Well, I think that unlike the previous economic crisis, and this moment the voices that are betting on a green exit are really very much present in the public debate. I think that this means an opportunity, as there had never been before, of reorientating policies in a different way in the fields of energy, of mobility, of employment, of economy. And this is an occasion in order to start with steps from the public administrations that until now, that was something unthinkable. I think that the public opinion is more ready than ever to change, to make a very big effort regarding sustainability. And I think that being linked to health, as we have said from the very beginning, I think this is the moment. This is the moment of channeling the economy in a more sustainable way, and an economy that I think that is also backed by the very own social stakeholders. The model is being changed. We have to make the most of it. And the challenge is to be leaders from the public sector and to go one step further, and also defining pace that can be followed by the whole citizens. And I think that this is our big challenge as governors. Thank you so much, Mrs. Gomez. Mr. Graf, go ahead, your conclusion. Yeah, thank you so much. We are facing three big. I have lost the sound. Sorry. Poverty, inequality, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity. And as many people have said, we have to have a more fair development. But from these three topics, I think it's very important to think of something that sometimes we forget. So if we keep on losing the natural capital that gives the basis of development to our societies, that allow really these services of the ecosystem and avoids the development of these pandemics, we are not going to have the possibility of really losing the problems of our populations and combat the climate change. And I think that really the core must be this preservation of biodiversity at the service of the inhabitants of these forests, so that they can improve their conditions of life with a more equitative interaction among cities where wealth is concentrated, development, and the rural areas where goods and services are provided, so that these cities can be feasible for the future. Thank you so much, Mr. Graf. Right now, Mr. Aragonés, go ahead. Now is the moment of the public powers to have the main roles and the citizens to play the main role, organized in a democratic way. And this reactivation must be ruled from the point of view of the public interest. And what can be better than these objectives of sustainable development and well-funded? And this must be a priority. It is not the moment right now from my point of view, and I think this is something all of us share, of tax austerity policies that can lead us to a cutoff in the budgets, but really in front of this shock, it is really indispensable to have quite the opposite. So to have expansion policies and also to have a main role in the public sector. And if I want to give you a headline, I would say that these objectives are the recovery, the post-COVID recovery at these objectives for sustainable development. And I think this is the best warranty to be able to face similar crises in the future with a much bigger resilience in the society. Thank you so much, Mr. Aragonés. Mr. Roblon, your turn now.
Yes, thank you very much for arranging this meeting. It's been very interesting to listen to you all. We need to continue the work and realize that the more towards a sustainable society we're heading, the more resilient we are when to face this kind of crisis. Because I think that this is not the last crisis we will face. So to take the opportunity, as many of you have pointed out, to learn from this and to make stronger society, more resilient societies that tackle the new challenges that we know are in the future. So there's no difference between handling the pandemic and moving toward a more sustainable world. They are very connected and should be, and it's the way forward.
Muchas gracias, señor Roblon.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roblon. Mr. Trane, the floor is yours. Everybody has said the same thing. I think there is a very big agreement among ourselves. I think that the word post-COVID is really the term or the new chain of green employment, especially in those countries that have got a very big natural wealth as Brazil and Sao Paulo. We have got the opportunity of preserving biodiversity at the same time that we are looking for the opportunities. For instance, the forest production of products of the natural goods, an intelligent use of the grounding because of the agriculture. Now everybody is going in this direction, and we could also think of an ecological tourism, which can be much more consolidated. And here we have got green employment, then the renewable energies with alcohol, biofuels, ethanol. We have got an open window, a window opened to many opportunities post-COVID for a more sustainable society with more resilient cities, and the climate change is really the slogan. All of us are aware of its importance, and we that have got lots of animals and lots of livestock, even in the wild, we have been talking very much about it. So the wild stock and animals must be preserved in order to avoid this pandemic we have known now. And we in Brazil, we are going forward in this sense. Therefore, I think this is a very favorable moment, and we have got an open window, and many opportunities are offered to us in order to make a chain of green employment for both Brazil and Latin America. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you that have joined us in the chat, that have participated, that have posed questions and comments, that have really questioned our panelists. Mrs. Moreno, your conclusion, your final idea. I think that the most important things have been said. All of us do agree that there is an agenda, and this is a world agenda, and this is a shared agenda, and this is an agenda that has been defined and we can follow in order to achieve this sustainability. And I think that in this evolution or turning point that we are living in the world right now, really to leave this concept that man is at the center of everything, and to put the planet at the center of everything, at the core of everything, and we are part of it. I would like to highlight that we are much better when we do the things together, and we are much better when we share, when we cooperate, and as of course when we work together, sharing ideas. And in this point, my central idea is that the role of the regions, that the role of the subnational governments is incredibly important in this transformation. But as I've said, I would like to highlight this cooperation, this collaboration, which is absolutely essential at the moment we live.
Thank you, President Moreno. Thank you. Thank you for participating in this event 2030 agenda, from global emergencies to solutions at the regional level, at the margins of the 2020 high-level political forum on sustainable development. It has been a pleasure for me to moderate this panel discussion. Regions4 Sustainable Development continues to work to implement the 2030 agenda. Bye.